Today, Westminster Abbey is the heart of Christian worship inside of Britain, and this is compounded by the fact that it is home to a huge number of royal burials. There are over 3,000 burials in total inside of the Abbey, and many of the royal tombs range from simple shrines to huge grand tombs showing life-like effigies. Inside of different parts of the Abbey, there are also many vaults under the floors which contain the coffins of royals, and in total there are 30 kings and queens buried inside of Westminster Abbey. This number is made up of 13 kings, 4 queen regents, 11 queen consorts, and 2 other queens. Some of them are buried in specific places upon their wishes, and there was also one queen consort of England who was not laid to rest inside of the Abbey for around 400 years, remaining unburied. But which kings and queens are buried in Westminster Abbey? And to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The first King of England who was buried inside of the Abbey is Edward the Confessor, who died in 1066 and caused a succession crisis, as he promised a number of people his crown when he died. Edward the Confessor's tomb is located in a specially made shrine behind the high altar inside of St Edward's Chapel, and the shrine is made from stone and Purbeck marble, and also featured a wooden canopy. It was decorated, but many of the jewels which were on his tomb have been stolen and taken over the years. Edward's wife, Queen Edith, was also buried on the left side of Edward's shrine, close to her husband. However, her grave is unmarked. Around the shrine of Edward the Confessor are buried many kings and queens of the medieval period, and these specifically left instructions to be buried near the Confessor, who is regarded as a saint, and they are buried in large marble tombs. Some of them have effigies and others do not and are more simple. Buried here is King Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, King Henry III, Queen Eleanor of Castile, King Henry V, Queen Philippa, King Edward III, King Richard III, and Queen Anne of Bohemia, Queen Anne of Cleves, and a few others. Now, over the centuries, many of these tombs have actually been opened, and what was found was remarkable, as the structures had at the time helped to preserve the bodies of the royals well. For example, it was said when Edward I's coffin was opened, the chin and lips were entire, but without any beard, and a sinking or a dip between the chin and under lip was very conspicuous. Both the lips were prominent and the nose short, as if shrunk, but the apertures of the nostrils were visible. There was an unusual fall or cavity on that part of the bridge of the nose which separates the orbits of the eyes, and some globular substance, possibly fleshy parts of the eyeballs, was movable in their sockets under the envelope. One thing about Westminster Abbey is that many of the tombs of the royals have been opened and at a time have been subjected to some looting. Objects have been taken from the tombs themselves, and souvenir hunters have desecrated them. King Henry V, the hero king of the Battle of Agincourt, was buried inside of a chantry chapel behind Edward the Confessor's shrine. However, his wife and consort, Katherine of Valois, was for centuries left unburied. Her remains were left in a box, which was opened upon the request of tourists who paid a fee to see her body. This led to her remains decomposing quickly and were torn to pieces over time, and people even took teeth from her skull and brought these. Eventually, Katherine of Valois was laid to rest in a proper burial, but it took 400 years. One of the other major areas of royal burials inside of the Abbey is inside the Lady Chapel created by King Henry VII. This was intended by the first Tudor king to become a huge mausoleum for his family and for many kings and queens who came later. The extension work required a number of the royal tombs to actually be moved slightly, but when the work was finished, it became a place where many kings and queens wanted to be buried. At the heart of the Lady Chapel is the tomb of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, and this is a large tomb which shows their effigies and lifelike images on them, and this is protected by large iron gates. Under a vault beneath the tomb, the first Tudor king and queen are buried, but also with them is the coffin of James I. James I, the first Stuart King of England, who was invited to rule both England and Scotland after Elizabeth I's death, wanted his coffin to be laid at the heart of Westminster Abbey. He even had the coffin of Elizabeth I removed from this specific vault to make space for himself. Elizabeth I is buried inside of a separate part of the Lady Chapel too, and inside of her small room are the remains inside of an urn, allegedly of the princes in the Tower, King Edward V and his brother, Prince Richard the Duke of York. These went missing during the Wars of the Roses, and they were, it's believed, murdered upon the orders of their uncle, King Richard III. But also buried inside of the vault beneath the effigy and tomb of Elizabeth I is Queen Mary I, or Bloody Mary, Elizabeth I's half-sister. She is laid directly below Elizabeth's coffin to symbolise that Elizabeth was supreme over her rule. Opposite Elizabeth I's tomb is a burial vault and site of Mary Queen of Scots, the executed Scottish Queen. Elizabeth had her cousin executed for treason against her inside the walls of Fotheringhay Castle, and in what was one of the most shocking moments of her reign. But after her death, James I, Mary's son, had a huge tomb commissioned for his mother, and despite being executed, he had Mary interred inside of Westminster Abbey under a huge tomb and effigy of her, which was slightly bigger, intentionally, than Elizabeth I's. Also, buried inside of this vault are many other members of the Stuart family, but many of them were minor royals, except for King Charles II, the Mary Stuart monarch, who was also interred there, as is Queen Anne, the final Stuart queen. Queen Mary II and William III, who led the glorious revolution against James II, are also buried inside of the Stuart vault, but these graves are not well publicised inside of the abbey. Also interestingly, the Queen of James I, Anne of Denmark, is laid to rest in a grave inside of the Lady Chapel, but her grave has no monument and is simply marked by a stone. King Edward VI, the successor to the notorious King Henry VIII, is also buried inside of Westminster Abbey. Edward's reign was short-lived, and he was a minor for the entirety of his reign, dying at the age of 15. He was buried inside of the Lady Chapel, beneath the original altar that was there, and his grave was left unmarked for many centuries until in 1966 a small black inscription stone was placed there. King George II is also buried within Westminster Abbey, and he was interred alongside his wife Caroline, who are interred inside of the Hanoverian vault, which was built below the central aisle of the Lady Chapel. There's no monument, just a small stone showing where the grave is found. King George II was the last of the monarchs to be buried inside of Westminster Abbey, and subsequent monarchs have been interred inside of Windsor Castle's St George's Chapel, or inside of places such as the Royal Mausoleum at Frogmore. Today, Westminster Abbey attracts thousands of tourists every day to see some of the most remarkable royal tombs on earth. There are many more who are buried inside of the Abbey, including many princes and princesses, but it's likely in the future that royal burials won't occur inside of the Abbey unless some form of extension work takes place, especially to the vaults underneath the floor, as they are becoming very full. In fact, one of the most recent interments of remains inside of the Abbey saw the ashes of scientist Stephen Hawking buried inside of the Abbey in a small vault underneath the nave. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.